That score is just so iconic. Seeing that imagery of the Hong Kong streets and then the buses and the taxis and then the boat journey to the island, it's got so many great moments in there, and it's so entertaining, and it's 90 minutes long, 95 minutes long, so it doesn't outstay its welcome either. Seeing like this incredibly charismatic human being do what he did without wearing a cape and without hiding his face was just astounding to me. That film stuck with me to the point where I had to see everything he had done.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Flixwatcher podcast. Today I'm joined by Gareth.
Hello.
Sope.
How you doing?
And Helen.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about the martial arts action classic Enter the Dragon.
Thank you as always to the mighty people for the mighty tunes, and thanks to Ben from Rockwood Audio for his awesome editing skills.
Please do remember to write a review and rate us on Apple Podcasts and anywhere you can do where you listen to the podcast, because it really does help us.
And you can join in the conversation with us on Twitter
at FlixWatcherPod and on Instagram
at Flixwatcher. Hello film fans, welcome to this episode of Flixwatcher podcast. Joining us today remotely we have Sope and Gareth. If you'd like to say hello and tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do, please.
Hi, I'm Gareth Evans. I'm the writer-director of The Raid, a bunch of martial arts films in Indonesia, and then also recently Gangs of London, a TV show for Sky Atlantic.
So how did that go, going to Indonesia to the UK and bringing that violence over?
Not too bad, actually. It went all right. We basically, I think the biggest sort of challenge was obviously translating the work day across, because in Indonesia we would just plug away hour by hour until we pretty much burnt out, which is not a great system of working, to be quite frank. And so when I got to UK, obviously before I did Gangs of London, I got to do Apostle first, and that really taught me the value of a UK working day when it comes to working in film and television. Like the discipline of having an 11 or 12 hour day, and then that's it. And then you stop at the end of that day, and whatever you didn't get, you just didn't get. It forced me to kind of be a bit more disciplined then in terms of my approach to sort of like filmmaking and television work.
Well, you brought over Gangs of London. Everyone said Gangs of London is a tough watch. And I thought, no, you're wrong. It can't be, because it's a national broadcast TV show, albeit from Sky, but in the first episode it's visceral from the start, really, isn't it? How was that, kind of getting that through the censors or the people who approved or greenlit the show?
They seemed to be all right with it. Casual way possible. It was just like, it was never really, we never had anything that was like a sort of bone of contention with them. I mean, okay. we would always discuss the approach to the action and to the violence, and we would always send them the previs, because we shoot that way in advance, so they knew what they were getting from the get-go. So there were no real surprises. You know, you get gifts, you send them scripts, you send them concept art, you send them previs of the action scenes, so there's no real major surprises. Obviously there's an extra layer of impact and viscera when it's all kind of fairly put together with sound and CGI and all the bells and whistles. So, you know, so when we're on set shooting the pub fight, for example, and, you know, for us, it's the silliness of Sope desperately trying to get a floppy rubber ashtray to fit inside the stuntman's mouth, you know, and when that goes through the process of VFX and then it looks like hard glass, then obviously it has a different kind of, you know, impact, let's just put it that way. But yeah, but no, they seem really behind it.
I saw a lot of the previous recently you posted on Instagram for, I think is it episode 5 when the Danish kind of strike force are coming down in the house. That looks amazing, and I heard that's how you've done it for The Raid and other action sequences. And I think that really sets you up for shooting it, doesn't it?
Massively so. It's like having a blueprint of what you're going to do that day, but it means that it's not just for me to know that the action scene works, but it also means that every department can kind of, reference that footage and then figure out what's needed of them each day. So they can figure out, like, is there anything needed from wardrobes, anything needed from makeup, is there anything needed in terms of camera rigging and how we need to execute the scene. And then also for someone like Sope then, who's doing the pub fight and the Len fight with us, and then obviously Elliot and Cole in Ep 3, he was able to know exactly what was going to be required of him on a shot-by-shot basis. So, I never did a thing where it's like, oh, we're just going to shoot coverage and shoot the whole scene in one go 50 times, and then you're going to burn out by the end of the day. He knew that there'd be certain shots, like certain close-ups or inserts, where he'd be able to kind of get his energy back up and ready again, because it's like, oh, I just need you to do this one quick insert of a hand being punched, or for this next shot, it's going to be your stunt double because there's no way we're going to let you do it, no matter how much you wanted to do it, we would never let him do it. And so it's kind of good in a way, because I guess from a performance side of things, you can focus all your energy on that 3, 5, 10-second shot, as opposed to thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get through like 50 different beats across a 2-minute sequence then?
Well, we did introduce Sope at the top of the show, but he hasn't really spoken. That's my fault, mainly. Sope, can you introduce yourself and tell us about the scenes that you did want to do, but Gareth wouldn't let you because of, I don't know, insurance maybe?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Sope Dirisu, and I play Elliot in the new Gangs of London, as well as lots of other things in the past and in the future. But I suppose scenes that I wanted... Okay, here's one. They wouldn't let me climb over the wall at the end of the pub scene. All I wanted to do is just do some like superhero Frosby flop over the beer garden wall whilst chasing Besmere through the streets of London. But they were just like, you're not allowed to do it. I was like, I know how to jump.
If your ankle flopped, you wouldn't have been chasing him for another 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I promised I was going to bend my knees and everything, but they wouldn't let me.
I think the rules are, if there's like a 3-foot drop or a 4-foot drop, then you're okay to do it. But that was like an 8-foot drop.
Right.
So we were like, no.
It's just too
All
high.
those years of high jumping at high school were for nothing.
But I mean, I did high jump at high school, but we had a massive, like 3-foot high mat to land on. So that's surely a different thing, isn't it? Would you have landed on the mat? Am I giving away too many secrets here?
Maybe.
Ooh, what can we tell them?
So what was it like, Sope, for you recording those fight scenes? And what's your background in any kind of action or martial arts at all?
I'll tell you what, I haven't done martial arts per se since I was maybe 12. I did a bit of karate and judo when I was younger, so that wasn't really credentials for me to present to Gareth in the audition, I've got my green belt from when I was 12. Can I please be in your action movie? I'm not sure that would have run. But I've always done a lot of contact sports, like rugby and American football, etc., from a young age. So I've always considered myself a very physical person, very physical actor. So I really relish the opportunity to be able to use my body in a different form of storytelling, I think using your body physically as an actor is really important in terms of creating the character, but using your body physically to tell the story of the fights, and that's one of the things I really loved about Gareth's fights and the ones that he designs, is that there really is a story to it. It's not just mindless violence. And I think a lot of the criticisms that we received to Gangs of London about it being gratuitous didn't really hold for me, because there was nothing that we did in the series that didn't have purpose, There was no violence that we showed that was like sadistic or anything that was truly gruesome. We didn't either show or didn't linger on. So the stories of the fights were really important, either for telling a story for the character or for what was going on in the world that we were trying to create.
Well, we're here today to talk about one of the most famous martial arts films, and that is Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon. Gareth, you chose Enter the Dragon. Can you tell us, first of all, why you chose it and give us a synopsis in 1 minute or less?
I chose this one because it was the first martial arts film I'd ever seen, which feels like a bit of a cliche, but it was. I saw it, or at least I remember seeing fragments of it at a friend's house when I was really young, and it left such a massive impact on me because I was never really into the sort of comic book world. I was never into superheroes. So, we saw things like Superman and we saw things like Batman, but they didn't kind of resonate with me because they didn't feel real. But when I saw Enter the Dragon and I saw Bruce Lee, this guy was real, and he was like a real, flesh and blood superhero to me. And to be honest, I'd never really probably experienced what martial arts was before then. So seeing like this incredibly charismatic human being do what he did without wearing a cape and without hiding his face was just astounding to me. And so that film stuck with me to the point where I had to see everything he had done. Not knowing obviously as a child, the sad tragedy of what befell him, if that makes sense. So when I was asked to kind of look through films and I saw Enter the Dragon, it was kind of like the most immediate choice for me, because it's always a good reason to go back and revisit a film like this. Weirdly, myself and Jude Poyer, who was the stunt coordinator on Gangs of London and on Apostle before this, we've actually seen Enter the Dragon twice in the cinema in the last year, because it played in the Prince Charles Cinema in London. And so while we were working in London, I took advantage of the fact that cinema was there, because it's such a beautiful venue anyway, and they show such great films. So we got to see it once where it was digital, and then once when it was 35mm print. So those were like both sort of special moments to be able to see a film like that.
What was it like in the Prince Charles? Because Helen and I talk about the Prince Charles more than we talk about Netflix on this show.
I mean, I love the cinema. I think it's amazing. And, in these times, it helps if people, just to do the whole soapboxing, but if people are wanting to support their cinemas, I mean, the membership's not that bad. It's pretty good value for money, and I think it's a good thing that we keep supporting cinemas, especially a cinema like that. And I used to go there quite often. We used to go quite a lot to see different retro screenings. So, I remember I took Xavier to go see a triple bill. Xavier directed episodes 6, 7, and 8. We started with RoboCop, moved on to True Romance, and then went on to Natural Born Killers, which was a very heavy day at the cinema, to be quite frank. You know what I mean? That's a lot of energy in 6 hours. So, yeah. But going back to Enter the Dragon, it holds a really special place in my heart. So that's why I picked it.
And what's the synopsis in a minute or less?
The synopsis, which I am going to pilfer wholeheartedly from IMDb because it's the easiest way I could do it. So I'll try to read this as naturally as I can. A martial arts expert is recruited to infiltrate a drug operation under the guise of taking part in an invitational competition sponsored by the one-handed crime boss, Han. This was Bruce Lee's most popular film in the West. There you go.
Helen, Sope, have you guys seen Enter the Dragon before? What were your thoughts on watching it before this time, if you have seen it?
I have definitely seen this film before, but it was so long ago that I wasn't sure if I had. And I watched it again recently for the purposes of this podcast, so as not to have nothing to say. And it was just full of this, like, I remember this part. I'm really excited for this part, It's I remember, not physically, but I definitely remember sharing the emotions of watching this for the first time, sitting next to my dad and being like, oh my God, this is so cool. And a lot of childish feelings came back as I watched it again now. So yeah, thanks for picking this one, Gareth. It's a real treat.
Helen.
So I guess I probably had the most kind of alien experience compared to everyone here. So I had seen this before, but I think I'd probably watched it when I was at university studying film, as it kind of was one of those ones that you needed to see. So that's kind of like my memory. I don't really have any memory of seeing it particularly young or any kind of martial arts introduction. So watching it recently for me probably didn't quite have the nostalgia in it. But Bruce Lee, I mean, you touched on it very briefly, potentially at his peak here, and just his presence on screen and how he handles himself and just everything about it is very, very magnetic performance. And when you're watching it, you're just kind of thinking like, what else could have happened with him and what other performance we could have get.
That's interesting to say, because I've always felt like Bruce was probably about to reach, like, he was in his peak when obviously tragedy fell. But there was so much more he could have given the film industry. And he was starting to usher in the new generation of action stars. Like, in Enter the Dragon, you've got Jackie Chan is in there in a very brief, small, tiny role. So is Sammo Hung. And, Sammo Hung, speaks with a lot of respect of Bruce in terms of like ushering him in. And I've always felt like Sammo is probably one of the best choreographers out there in the Hong Kong film scene. And so to imagine the possibility of at one point you could have had a version of events where Sammo would have choreographed Bruce in a film together in the 80s, it would have just been like incredible, absolutely mind-blowing. So yeah, the what could have beens are pretty strong in that one.
I think that is all over this film actually, because I watched it. My parents used to record everything on VHS. I don't know why. So at one point there'll be like Tootsie next to Enter the Dragon, next to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So when we were kind of left to our own devices,
that's a great triple bill, by the way. Sorry,
that's a Prince Charles worthy triple bill. That. And when me and my brothers would be at home, we just literally go. We didn't know what the films were about. We just put them in there, and from the like opening shot, you're like, oh shit, this is something different, and it's just gutting because all those other films, you see how good he is, but it's just I can't watch any of his other films because they're just not a complete film. They're just like segments of him being awesome.
Oh, I disagree.
Go on.
So I would say this because I'm obviously a huge fan of his work, and like I think going back in his catalog, I think Fist of Fury is probably his most complete film. Yeah. Fist of Fury is probably the cleanest of all of the stuff he did. It's it's a very simple tale of revenge and about mystery and intrigue about the fact that his master has died and he's coming back grieving the death of his master but feeling something's not right. So there's something more. I think and also there's the interest between the history of Japan and China in Fist of Fury. I think there's some interesting stuff there culturally as well as the sort of the action stuff, and also he shows more tenderness in him in Fist of Fury with some of the sort of romance subplots. I won't go out to bat for Way of the Dragon as much as I love some of the fight sequences in Way of the Dragon. The opening scene when he orders 10 soups by accident is not the highest point of comedy in film history, but yeah, no, I think like Fist of Fury I think is very, very much high up there. Obviously I think Enter the Dragon feels more polished. It's that kind of obviously it's a version of a James Bond film, but without James Bond, and it's a version of that kind of style of filmmaking, but with no guns. And let's do away with guns. And they do it pretty quickly. You know what I mean? Even I love the fact that Bruce even kind of acknowledges it. Because like, why don't you just go in there with a 45 and bang, settle it? And then it's like, no, we can't have guns. Okay, and even Bruce shrugs. Like that's the greatest part of it. Like he shrugs at the idea of okay, I gotta go in there and just use my hands and my feet. But yeah, I think the filmmaking quality is very high. I do rate Robert Clouse as a director in this film. I think some of the sort of camera angles and some of the sort of set pieces and the scenes are really well done. I think the flashback with the sister is inspired in moments. There's lots of weird POVs, like there's the shot of the piece of glass that she's holding. The rack focuses from O'Hara to the glass. It so feels like Italian horror almost in a way, that giallo sort of feel. So I think there's lots of cool stuff in Enter the Dragon as well. But we can keep talking about that. Sorry.
No, but I mean, we've had recently, and was it James Dyer from Empire that picked John Wick Chapter 2, and that ends in a mirror fight, or the fight in the mirror room, and of course that's homage directly. Well, I think I haven't asked Chad Stahelski. Maybe you guys
think it
have
had
them,
quite a big influence on it.
I would have thought so. Yeah, I would have thought so. But for John Wick Chapter 2, they just kind of put the camera anywhere and they just edit it out afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
This time I was watching that mirror scene. I was just trying to see, because they would have had to place the camera just so, and it would have been set up just so. I mean, what?
I think they shot a lot of two-way mirrors in that, didn't they? Like you would in a police interrogation room and stuff like that. I think there was a couple of shots that were done like that because they had to hide them somewhere. It was it's an incredible sequence, ballsy as anything to do, and obviously in a weird way, you can kind of see why they did a scene like that in that room, because there's not an awful lot of choreography within that space. It seems very more stalk and slash. So you can get away with it being quite disorienting. Whereas when it comes to the actual action, it's more traditional then. And they keep that sort of outside of the mirror room, more in the big field space or in his room of gloves.
Yeah. The four carving knives.
Yeah.
Sope, do you think what do you guys reckon? Start with you, Sope, about because you seem to, I guess, with Enter the Dragon, there's one of the films where they brought a Western actor, a Western martial artist to fight in a kind of Eastern film, I guess, to try and bring a bigger audience. But I always kind of think, oh, they're not as good. Like John Saxon,
unfortunately,
seems like a nice guy, but it's just.
Even with Jim Kelly, who I've been told wasn't a martial artist before, he's just an actor who's.
He wasn't. I thought he was.
Like myself. But you can just see that there isn't the same fluidity to their movements. And like, I think Jim does a really great job of disguising it. I mean, it's even referenced in the film that your style is unorthodox. And he's like, I don't really care about styles, just want to win, you know? And he jazzes it up, and you can hear it in his soundtrack, like the funk that he's bringing to his fights. But,
he gets a bit of a blaxploitation soundtrack, doesn't he, Jim? I noticed
yeah, he does. But I sort of celebrate that, actually, bringing that culture into sharing that culture with Eastern cinema. But yeah, there's just not the same fluidity or beauty in the movements that Western actors have. Especially, it's almost highlighted when they're in the Eastern setting because everything around them is beautiful, and they just come out a bit sort of stunted and frumpy in comparison.
And it's not obviously to say that Western actors can't fight in that way. It's just that these. I mean, I'm a martial artist, former, I guess, but I started Taekwondo at 18, and then moved on to capoeira like at 24. So that's a whole difference from starting. You know,
Since you can
play the
walk.
guitar. You what? Sorry, since you could walk, exactly.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation about American football because I used to play that, and the conversation was like, "Can a Brit go over to America and play?" And they were like, "Yeah, maybe, but you have to remember that they've been throwing American football since they could walk, in the same way that we've been playing football since we could walk, or rugby since we could walk, whatever the culture is. So it's just about those fine motor skills and learning to move your body in that way from such an early age. Yeah, you can definitely learn it later on, but to pretend that you're going to have the same control of it as somebody who has been practicing it twice as long as you have is almost an insult to those people who are practicing it, which is where the whole Iron Fist debate came in on Netflix. Do you remember?
No, I've no idea what you're on about.
Yeah, moving on swiftly.
I mean, for me, I'm not a martial arts specialist at all. But when I watch scenes with martial arts, and I mean, in my head, it's kind of like dancing to me, and especially when you're sort of making films. Not that I've ever made any films, but that each person is obviously dancing their part. And I guess with anything, some people are born dancers or can pick up the rhythm and be able to dance, and some people, no matter how hard they try, just don't have that kind of dancing vibe about them.
I think that's definitely true of me anyway. It's a sure thing, both for martial arts and dancing. So yeah, but I think like going back to that thing about Western martial artists, because I think in the Dragon's probably not the best example of it, but obviously, you know, since then we've had people like Cynthia Rothrock, for example, who's an incredible martial artist, but also an incredible screen fighter. And those two things don't usually go hand in hand, you know, and you know, Cynthia Rothrock carved a huge career for herself, you know, out in Hong Kong, doing lots of films out there, but, you know, and she proved herself and then came back to the US, ironically working with Robert Clouse on China O'Brien. And so, you know, you look at, like, you know, Van Damme, for instance, and you look at Michael Jai White, and you look at Scott Adkins, and these guys can move exactly the way that, you know, the sort of, you know, the Hong Kong Chinese counterparts would move as well. It's just that traditionally in the West, when it comes to like martial arts as a genre, it's got a weird label associated with it in American cinema, where it's like, oh, if you're making an out-and-out martial arts film, then it's not allowed to be classified as, like, you know, theatrical. But then you look at the action films that are being made that are kind of being made as sort of what used to be called direct to DVD, but now probably going to be considered the streaming films. And you look at like the work of guys like Isaac Florentine, and you look at like Jesse Johnson, and you look at John Hyams, who did one of the Universal Soldier films. The action scenes in those films are incredible. Like, you know, they're putting Hollywood to shame in terms of like the big budget, you know, mega blockbuster stuff. And the rhythms are there, and all the sort of dynamic stuff is there. It's just that we don't get to see it as front and center. But if you really, really dig for it, It's all there to be found and loved.
I can't. This is one of my favorite films ever. So when he suggested it, I was like, yeah, fuck yeah, that's just absolutely. I haven't seen it for like 10 years at least. I'm sure. There was like a DVD special that came out, and that's when I last saw it. It was probably one of the last DVDs I bought before I don't know, things went streaming. But
did you all spot the guy who smiles in the background?
No.
There's
a scene?
There's a scene right towards the end when Han is like, for some reason, Han decides to literally name every person that he wants to attack Bruce in order, instead of just like fucking pile on him. It's like he's like, you go first. All right. Well, the first round of people that comes up, there's a bit where Bruce kicks this one guy almost like 5 times in a row, and he's like, ba 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 bam. And as the guy hits the deck, there's a fighter in the background who's in frame, and he just fucking bursts out laughing in the middle of the shot, and it's in there. It's in the cut. It's amazing. It's a real special little sort of what you call it, Easter egg to find within the film.
I'll definitely look out for that in the next watch, which I hope will be will be sooner than 10 years. So how many times, Sope, have you seen? Well, you've said you just maybe seen it once as a kid, but how does it rate for you guys?
It wasn't alien to me when I watched it this time, but I couldn't tell you how many times it was because it was so long ago.
Where's it kind of rated in the pantheon of martial arts films and action films generally, through to the modern age? If you want to include The Raid, but also things like On Back and...
I'm never going to include my own stuff, no chance.
I don't know.
Gangs of London, I don't know.
It was so... Because it really brought Eastern martial arts films to the fore in the West, and there may have been some other front runners as well, but it's hard. It's like having the Kobe versus Jordan conversation. Like it's not fair, and it's almost like to rate it against films that are coming out now. Those films wouldn't exist if Enter the Dragon wasn't there. So I don't want to say that it's cinematically it's excellent, but the things may have developed since then. But it's just so important to hold on to it, and remember it and watch it and celebrate it. I don't know if I could say where it ranks on a list, for example, but I know that list wouldn't exist if we didn't have Enter the Dragon.
That's a really good answer.
It is, isn't it? Media trained.
I think what I would say to that is it's quite rare for something, because the film is so focused on action in that respect. It's rare then to have a film that contains action that can stand the test of time, because it's really hard, because it's like storytelling has been around for centuries. You know what I mean? It's not, regardless of where we are in terms of the medium and the format. It's been since the dawn of time. And so when it comes to something that's very specific about action and capturing it on film, if you look at the stuff that was done, at the birth of cinema, and you track it through in terms of like the way, talking specifically about like, Chinese martial arts, how they appeared on film, and you look at the old sort of like the old Wong Fei Hung films of Quan Tak King, the martial arts in those, they're not going to be as as developed and as evolved as a process as what we have now. All of those things will evolve over time, and we find new ways to capture them. We find new ways to move the camera around, and we find and choreographers will have more time to shoot the action or less time depending on the budget. So it's a constantly evolving process. So it's a bit hard to kind of compare and contrast like the action in Enter the Dragon to the action you'd see in a Jackie Chan film from like the mid 80s when he was in his golden peak of that design. Like I can't sit and genuinely say, oh, I love the action in Enter the Dragon, it's just as good as the final scene in Police Story. No. Yeah. Because Police Story is seminal in terms of that. But Bruce did something incredible with the films that he made. He brought it to the forefront and brought it to a global audience. And it's like this. I think for some of there's certain Jackie Chan films in his catalog where it's like I'll watch them and skip to the fight scenes. But when it comes to Enter the Dragon, I'm happy to sit there and watch the whole damn film from beginning to end. Obviously, there are certain scenes that don't quite play as well as they might have back in the 70s. There's a lot of let's say politically incorrect moments within the film. But when that film starts and you hear that score from I'm going to say his name wrong, Lalo Schifrin, that score is just so iconic. Seeing that imagery of the Hong Kong streets and then the buses and the taxis and then the boat journey to the island, it's got so many great moments in there, and it's so entertaining. And it's 90 minutes long, 95 minutes long, so it doesn't outstay its welcome either.
That's one thing I like about it a lot, is that it's almost like a computer game concept for a film. You go there to the island and get find all the drugs and
kill the baddies
on the way through. Get the baddie, and that's that's another thing I love about the raid. It's just a simple concept. You get to the floor, and on the way, get the bad guy who's on the top floor, basically. And I think that's something that we don't see a lot in films and concepts. And Gangs of London as well. The concept isn't overwrought. It's not that complex. You just sit there and just let it kind of wash over you. And I really enjoyed it for that layer. It's not the wire where you have to be like fully focused, but with Gangs of London, you are just like, your eyes are open from like 20 minutes in when Sope is scraping the guy's head over a wall and you see the blood trail left behind there. That was one of the first things for me. I was like, that's a bit gross.
Yeah, I think
that kind of storytelling, I think, is something we don't get enough of these days. I think sometimes it tries to make it too complex and have a 3-hour long story film, which Helen and I've discussed. We're not often that big fans of stories that could be shrunk down into something that's half that package.
I think that's probably right. I think we are also, Enter Dragons had a huge sort of like influence on lots of different films. And weirdly, I don't think I've ever spoken about this, but it influenced me when I was writing Apostle, weirdly, which doesn't seem like the most obvious sort of comparison. But there's a sequence in Apostle where Dan Stevens' character sneaks out at night to go and investigate the community. And he gets spotted and gets seen, and then the next day you have the lineup in the church with Michael Sheen walking around and saying like, these are the rules of the place, no one's supposed to sneak around, and they go through and and make an example of someone, and that was me riffing on Enter the Dragon. I would never have told them that when we were filming it. Be like, can you play it a bit more like Han?
Can you try that with one less hand?
Yeah.
Okay, good. One of the things I loved about this as well. Sorry for me to lord over this film, but is the sound? I'm not sure if it's Foley, but the sound effects, the kind of action, brilliant. I don't know how many of those are Bruce Lee, how many of those are added in ADR or post, but
it was all ADR.
It's
all ADR.
The entire thing is ADR.
A lot of times in Hong Kong, that's what they used to do, right? They used to just roll and then record the audio separate later on. So I think there's a couple of films, there's a couple of films at Jackie's where it wasn't his voice for a while. I think I might be completely
even
wrong.
In the
now.
Chinese version.
Yeah.
In fairness, I think this, and there's only one other Bruce Lee film that he's speaking in English, which is his voice.
Yeah, that's true.
But his voice is great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's going back to what you, Helen and Gareth said about him being such an enigmatic screen presence, and it's just it's so sad every time that film ends. I'm like, oh fuck, there could have been so much more of that.
One of the things I always loved about Bruce, and it's kind of like it's a trait throughout all of his films. It happens in The Big Boss, it happens in Fist of Fury, it happens in Way of the Dragon, less so in Way of the Dragon, but it definitely happens in Enter the Dragon. Is that he plays characters that are kind of driven by some kind of like revenge motif, and that was revenge was obviously the tested plot line of every martial arts film ever made. But whenever he would get his revenge, whenever he would have that moment of catharsis, it was always one where he kind of disappeared into his anger, he disappeared into his fury, and you'd always see it etched into his face. So again, The Big Boss, it's when he kills the sort of the foreman's son, when he realizes he finally strikes the punch, and it feels like it hurts him just as much as it hurts the other person. That happens a lot of times in Fist of Fury, but in Enter the Dragon, it's that moment when he finally kills O'Hara in competition and he steps down on him. that face is filled with anguish. That face is filled with like weird, twisted emotions, and like it's not the sort of like, there's a tradition now, like in some sort of 90s martial artists, where there's a certain amount of narcissism that goes on, and then you'll see certain shots where it was like, oh, you got to have your close-up sort of strike the pose hero shot now, or your slow-mo moment where you get to look badass and cool, but it's all fake, and it's all just aesthetics. But Bruce was willing to show that he was sort of damaged within, and that that he let the demon kind of like take over him for that moment. And so when he does that thing, he jumps down and boom, cracks on him. Yeah. That close up of his face is just like, it's so much stuff going on in his eyes. And I think that's why he was so iconic and separate himself from the herd of other sort of martial artists that was starting to peak at the explosion of that genre, is that he just had that presence, he had that charisma to him. But he had lots of humor in him too, like the scene with the snake, when he takes the snake and he slips it into the room, and those two guys throw they could throw the chair through the window, and they barrel out of there, and he's just like sat there like, oh God, here we go, you know what I mean? Just like, what's the big deal? But there's it's such a shame. There's so much more that he could have given us.
I feel like I should offer a sort of a counter to it, that I feel that it does suffer from its age. And I'm glad that you brought it up before I mentioned it, Gareth, that it is James Bond, but without the guns and with Kung Fu instead. And I kind of feel that the film itself is a bit crap. And it is just Bruce Lee's performance that holds it up. And the mirror scene is amazing. But I think for me, as a film watching it now, maybe because me personally, the martial arts that I've seen are more recent films, and that's just more what I'm into. The performance is much better than kind of the sum of its parts for Enter the Dragon.
So that's fair.
I'm sympathetic to what Helen said, because I am watching the choreography of it and knowing that it's seminal and knowing that it's a classic, but still having like Jude Poyer and Chris Webb's voice in my head being like, is that a hit? Was that a hit? You know, seeing it for the first time in the cinema when it first came out must have been incredible. But to put it up against, this is what we were saying about like how the art of cinema and the story of fights and how fights on screen have developed over time. Yeah, you can't. I mean, we mentioned John Wick earlier, and I'm not saying that John Wick is a bastion to be upheld, but you can't watch a fight in John Wick or a fight in The Raid or a fight in Gangs of London and then watch Enter the Dragon and be like, oh, it's like like Gareth said yourself, you can't hold them against each other. So we have been blessed with an advancement, a development in fights on screen, and therefore it is difficult to say like, oh yeah, it was excellent. But I think they hold their own places in time, you know.
I think for me, it's like I love the Magnificent Seven. I think the Magnificent Seven is like a wonderful, the original. I think it's an incredible film. Like I love that film, but when I look at it as a Western, in terms of like the action contained within a Western, the difference, the disparity of quality of the action between something like the Magnificent Seven and then the Wild Bunch is just like worlds apart. Mm-hmm. But I love both films for different reasons. You know what I mean? It's like the Wild Bunch is that next level of action cinema. I mean, for me, to be perfectly honest with you, the Wild Bunch, and I've spoken about this film like endlessly, is just one of those films where it still somehow holds up. The way he approaches the action in that film, the editing style, the shots, the rhythms, and the energy of it, it's insane that film still holds up, but it does. And you know, for me, like when I talk about like pure, just like an action sequence, the ending of the Wild Bunch is as good as anything in Hard Boiled, which I think is probably the pinnacle of action cinema and will never ever get bettered and never get beaten. So for me, like those two films are like up there. But they're like 30 years apart, right? Yeah. Now I'm realizing I'm just arguing against myself of what I was talking about. But it's it's that thing of like when it comes to the presentation of martial arts, you look back at anything in that 70s period, there's lots of stiff movements in there. It's finding its form, and it's what I find interesting is that, you know, the cowboy movies had been going on for like decades and decades before, so they were finessing it throughout the history of cinema. Martial arts cinema, in terms of it becoming popularized and really, like, you know, into extreme, when like Shaw Brothers came along and Golden Harvest came along and those films were developing. It was almost kind of like the mid 70s then, after Bruce's legacy had kind of like kicked in, that it really just took off then. And it went on such a stratospheric sort of rise and evolution, that when you get to that tail end of the 70s and then the early 80s, then they are worlds apart then between, you know, what was happening in the early 70s then. My strongest sort of like criticism of it, weirdly, is mostly its outdated approach in terms of like where we are now as a world compared to where they were back then when they were making that film. And that shares a lot in common with, again, the James Bondisms of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Its treatment of characters is not really strong. It's not a strong point, let's just put it that way. But yeah.
That's fair enough. Should we head to the scores, guys?
I'm Sam Clements, host of the 90 Minutes or Less Film Festival, another podcast in the Stripped Media family, a podcast that celebrates movies under 90 minutes long. Each episode, I'm joined by a special guest who selects a movie to join our prestigious lineup. Past guests have come from the worlds of film, television, music, food, comedy, and podcasting. Search for us now on the app you're currently listening to this podcast, or join us at 90minfilmfest.com.
So welcome to the Flixwatcher scores. We've got our own special scores. All of the points are out of 5. You may use decimal places if you wish. And we will start with you, Gareth, because you chose the film, with the recommendability. So how much would you recommend this out of 5, please?
It's too important a piece of cinema for the history of martial arts for it to represent Bruce Lee. So I'm going 5. I'm just going full on 5.
Fair enough. Sope, what's your score?
I will go for a 4.73.
Nice. Any reason behind that?
Yeah, just because, like Gareth said, it's so important. And I think in terms of appreciating the development of cinema, development of storytelling, and also just to see Bruce Lee do his thing, and like, it's so important that people watch it. I suppose like it loses 0.27 marks for me just because of my inability to take the Foley seriously. When someone gets kicked and it sounds like a slap. I know that's one of the things Gareth loves, but that's the only thing. That's my only criticism of it.
I don't know how much you guys were gamers in the day, but there's a game on the Amiga called IK Plus, International Karate Plus, and I'm sure they just ripped off the sound and the Foley and the noises from Enter the Dragon from Bruce Lee, and I used to absolutely love it. It's like, I don't know if you ever played that game at all.
There was I might be showing my age, but there was a game on the ZX Spectrum of Bruce Lee which was amazing.
Oh, was it?
50 levels, and they would just send you right back to level 1, do it all over again. You get chased by a sumo that looked like an astronaut, and a ninja that just carried a stick. But it was amazing. It was like the best game ever back then.
Helen, recommendability score.
Yeah, so I've kind of already given my kind of piece on this one, and I was kind of thinking, if I was someone sort of getting into films for the first time and I'd sort of grown up on John Wick or The Raid and then came to this, I wonder how my brain might react to it and whether it would have the same kind of feelings that you guys have sort of had from having grown up with it and be your first kind of introduction to martial arts. So I'm looking at it a little bit more objectively, but I think problem for me is I don't like James Bond anyway, and it just really did give off kind of that kind of filmmaking style, unfortunately. That said, it is massively important for cinema generally, not just for what Bruce Lee did to bring martial arts to the West. So I'm going to give it a solid 4.
I'm going to give it a 4.98. That is because I couldn't recommend it to although my parents back in the day would have watched it, but I think nowadays they kind of would not like the violence in it. So those are for 0.1 for each for parents, but for everyone else, I'd say, yeah, you need to watch Enter the Dragon because it's amazing, and it does set the stall out. And we've talked about action and martial arts films then versus now, but I think there's still, you can say that about a lot of things. Sope talked about Michael Jordan versus Kobe Bryant. You don't get Kobe without Michael, and you still look at Michael Jordan now, and you still look at shots of him now, and you're like, well, that was amazing. That was legitimately great. It happens with music, happens with filmmaking. There's all these kind of things. There's always someone's built up the foundation from which other people can jump off. And if you don't recognize that's rock solid foundation, then you can't have the Ong Baks or the Raids or the John Wick Chapter 3s or the Hero, for example, which have kind of broken through. Crouching Tiger. If it wasn't done well in this level, then those other films wouldn't have happened in the same way. 4.98. Repeat viewing score, Gareth.
I'm the worst person to ask for this because of the amount of times I've seen it.
That's good, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm gonna say 4.5.
Sope?
I'm going to go lower. I'm going to say that it's a film that everyone should see, and I would like to see it again at least once a decade, but probably more often than that.
I'm going to correct you on that. You need to see it later this year because the Criterion are going to put out a 4K remaster of it.
Oof. I mean, I'll see it twice this year then. But I'm going to go for a 3.3, just because it should be returned to, but not with any sort of regularity.
What are your most reviewed films, guys?
Lion King.
The
original, yeah.
Nice.
For sure.
The remake doesn't exist in my world.
It is deleted.
It's cancelled.
Planes, Trains and Automobiles.
Oh.
It's a masterpiece. It's brilliant. What else? Police Story I'd rewatch a lot. Yeah. And then there's a Japanese film called Kikujiro by Takeshi Kitano, which is just a beautiful feel-good movie. It's a weird thing because I watch a lot of comedy sitcoms mainly in any of my downtime because I make such miserable things. So my downtime is watching comedy shows. So it's like I'm going through. I mean, I Peep Show, all 9 seasons of that I've been through probably like 7 times. And I'm introducing my daughter to Brooklyn Nine-Nine at the moment, so I'm watching that for the 5th time. And
Helen's a big fan.
I love that show so much. I've not seen season 6 or season 7 yet because we've restarted. So we're on season 5 right now.
I joined a bit late, so I haven't quite got to the new ones yet.
What season are you on at the moment?
I don't know.
Season 5.
Netflix.
4, maybe?
When you get to season 5, the first 2 episodes have one of my favorite side characters. Caleb the Cannibal is the best. It's so good. You're going to love it.
I'll tell you what, I used to watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy every Christmas with my family.
Why?
Because it's a Christmas trilogy film.
Absolutely. Do you not see the Easter egg Santa that pops up in the back of Helm's Deep? That's a complete joke. Don't take that seriously. But no, I don't know. It's just that was the epic journey tale that I grew up on. So that would be high on my repeat watching.
If we're talking trilogies, we just did Back to the Future recently for the 10 millionth time ever. That one, yeah. The first film in that is absolute frame perfection, as Matt Flannery would definitely agree to.
I think Back to the Future 1 is perhaps my most rewatched film ever.
It's still tense.
Yeah. It's probably one of your Helen was working at the Secret Cinema, Back to the Future, so you've probably seen it most out of.
I've seen it a lot. I saw it a lot over a few month period.
Amazing.
Like 6 nights a week for 2 months.
Repeat viewing score for Enter the Dragon, Helen.
I like that it's like an hour and a half. It's, it's not like a 2-hour epic. I give it a 2.5. I think I would be unlikely to want to kind of sit and watch it in kind of a home environment, and that I'd probably get a lot more enjoyment watching it at somewhere like the Prince Charles, or at least with a group of people or someone else who was really into it to kind of get that kind of enthusiasm.
I can see that. There's definitely, when it comes to those types of films, the communal aspect is massive. Because I grew up obviously watching these films on like VHS and stuff like that. I never really got to see them on like in the cinema. And when I finally did start to get to see these films in cinema, it's like a whole new way of watching them. It's an amazing experience.
What was the audience like when you saw Enter the Dragon at Prince Charles? Because the Prince Charles, if they like a film, they get behind it, and they give you different levels and layers of appreciation for a film sometimes. So what was it like for you watching it?
I mean, I think it was a big love fest. I don't think many people were going to go on a really hot summer Sunday afternoon to watch Enter the Dragon if they hadn't already seen it before. So I think it was a big old love fest in the screening. You know what I mean? Everyone kind of awkwardly laughing at the uncomfortable stuff, and then waiting for those scenes to be over so we could get back to sort of enjoying the visceral action of Bruce using nunchucks, which is another thing as well. The nunchucks were cut from the original VHS releases all the way up until late 90s, I think, somewhere.
I think that was that DVD release.
The DVD release,
first time they put the nunchucks back in.
Yeah, Hong Kong Legends, yeah.
Because they thought people could get 2 pieces of stick and screw a chain in them and make their own nunchucks.
I think they were an illegal weapon in the UK at the time. It was the same with like the Sai, I think, as well. That's why the Ninja Turtles came out. That I think there was an issue about the fact that Michelangelo used nunchuck. I'm almost certain that was the case, because over here it was Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, not Ninja as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm going to give this a 4.1, and it's one of those films which I wish I watched more often than I have done. I guess maybe over the past 10 years, but it was growing up. It was something that maybe my brothers would watch like maybe twice a summer, and then go out fighting each other. As well as, watching Karate Kid and Rocky, you finish that and start punching each other. But it's just one of those films which is just ingrained in my childhood. And I hope I watch it more than once a decade, maybe once every 3 or 4 years, I'd say. But definitely want to go to Prince Charles and watch it when things open up again.
Yeah.
Gareth, small screen score. You're the only one that's seen it on a big screen. How would you rate it for watching it on a small screen?
It's how I first saw it. I've seen it in so many different sizes and formats, and pan and scan and widescreen and everything. So for me, yeah, it's screens are big now and quality's amazing. Everything's HD or 4K anyway, and it's widescreen, it's scope, it's as it was meant to be seen. So I don't think you lose that much anymore in terms of and obviously the mix I think would have been mono at the time or stereo at the time, not 5.1. So it works perfectly at home as well as it would have on a big screen. But just, as long as you can fill your home when it's safe to do so with a lot of people, then yeah, it's a 4.5 again. I'm not going to go too much lower on my scores for this film.
Sope?
I know, especially DOPs hate people watching their films on smaller screens, regardless of its quality, because there is, especially with Lord of the Rings or something, there's a cinematicness of it, especially when you've got really massive wide shots of like landscapes, etc. And I don't think there are many of those in this film. I used to watch things on my iPhone or whatever I could, basically just to get the story, sometimes. I'm so sorry, Gareth, and to all filmmakers out there. But I was a lot more interested in the story and the performances rather than the epic cinema-ness of it. And I don't know if the story of this film is so compelling that I would encourage people just watch the story, So Yes, TV screens are bigger now. I wouldn't necessarily categorize them as small screens. When you say small screens, I'm thinking like, do you watch it on your laptop or your iPad or your iPhone? And
we're saying the home viewing experience rather than the cinema.
Okay, sure. Oh, in terms of sitting in the lounge and watching it with your family, then yeah, I'd give it a 4. But anything lower than like a 40-inch TV, the score drops exponentially.
Helen?
Yeah, I'm going to say that I'm going to go for a 4 as well. I think the mirror scene is amazing. Like, I just really like that, and I also really like the way the chase with his sister is filmed from above, and I think that is really, really, really great as well. And we've already talked about having the opportunity to have the communal experience, so I think it is fine watching on TV, and there's a couple of bits that are really nice, but I don't think it loses anything by watching it kind of on a TV arena. But I'm not giving it the full 5 because I feel the shared experience would probably add to the viewing.
I'm going to go 4.5 because I want to watch it with Prince Charles now and watch it with other people. But yeah, I think like 90% of my viewing of this was on a 14-inch television with the VHS combined into it. Into the same, you remember those when it was combined into the same unit?
Yeah, I had one of those.
And that was how I watched it. Me and my brothers in our bedrooms, and it's fine then. It'll do now, but I loved it. And finally, engagement score. How engaged were you whilst watching a film? Were you on Twitter? Were you at second screening? Were you doing your tax forms? Were you ironing? How involved in the film were you?
If we're talking purely like engagement and not being distracted and not looking anywhere else and not fucking on my phone, then I have a rule when I watch films nowadays, because I used to be, going back a couple of years ago, I was terrible for it, where I'd see my phone sat there, and then anytime it would light up, I'd hit pause and then check my phone and disrupt the film, and it used to drive me nuts because it would take me 3 hours to watch a 90-minute film otherwise. So I turn my phone off now when I watch films. So I just don't want any kind of distraction. So for me, I was fully engaged. So 5.
So it's a default 5 for you for any film, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's Enter the Dragon or whether it's some other film that I'm not going to name now because it makes it sound like it's on the bottom end of the scale. But it's going to be a 5 for me because I just focused on it entirely.
Sope?
I would say I give it a 4.5 because it's 90 minutes and you just lick straight through it. It doesn't ever really sag. Yeah, there are moments that don't hold up today, but I don't feel like we're dwelling on anything too long. The action of it is compelling. The story is enough. And I had my phone by me. I was watching it on Netflix Party as well, so I could have been messaging my friend, but I wasn't. I've got my family in the house all shouting and screaming, but I was locked in. So yeah, 4.5.
Helen?
I was very naughty. I just got really into reading a bit more about Bruce Lee and his life and his family, and just kind of a little bit more about sort of cinema at that time, and how he kind of changed the representation of Asian males on cinema from that. So and so I can't really say that I was fully engaged, but whilst watching it, I did learn like a lot more about Bruce Lee. So I'm sorry, but I can't give maximum engagement scores because I was being a bit naughty. But I was watching. So 3.5 for me.
Yeah, I'm going to go for 5. Loved it. Like I said, it's been 10 years since I watched it, so I was just excited for the scenes I'd forgotten, for the scenes, for some of the quotable lines, the noises, and that mirror scene. Just looking forward to watching that again because it was the first time since seeing John Wick Chapter 2, and I was just excited to see if there was any camera shots. The camera's laid in the background. I don't know why I was trying to kind of forensically take it apart, but I was just excited every single step of the way, and I think Stone Cold 5. And that gives us an overall score of 4.25688 for Enter the Dragon, which is high.
That's pretty high, yeah.
High.
Anything over a 4 is really good.
Okay, so we reached out to our Twitter followers, and do follow us on Twitter at FlixWatcherPod, because every time we record, we put a message out saying, and in this case, we're reviewing Enter the Dragon with the Raid director Gareth Evans and Sope Dirisu of Gangs of London. Have you seen it? Tell us your thoughts and your score out of 5 stars for an on-air shout out on Flixwatcher. Helen, do you want to take the first one that you can see on your screen?
Yep, so the first one is from The Future's Overrated. The only thing that lets it down is not enough Jim Kelly. Other than that, it's pretty flawless. 5 massively pointy throwing stars.
I am always gutted that Jim Kelly dies in this film.
I'm gutted he dies when he does, but it's a great scene.
Mm.
He has the best line in the film.
Yeah. And we didn't see much more of him after Enter the Dragon, do we? He's got in Black Belt Jones and a few other things, but he doesn't, I thought...
Yeah, Black Belt Jones was another Robert Clouse film, wasn't it? And then he did Hot Potato, and then a few other martial arts films after then, but yeah.
I'm going to go to Sudden Double Deep, friend of the podcast. My dad taped off the telly for me when I was far too young, same. Bruce Lee in a grown-up James Bond type movie, we talked about that. I was hooked. I was pretty much wore the tape out, and that Layla Schifrin score. Yeah, I'm going to have to look out for the score on, I'm sure, hopefully it's on Spotify, because I did notice it this time for the first time, and I did see the different themes to the different characters, and I thought it was just a really cool kind of underpinning to the story. Helen, do you want to take the next one?
Yep, so the next one is from Movie Reviews in 20 Q's podcast. While for many it's their favourite martial arts film, for me it's just one of my favourite films. 6 stars. Not allowed 6 stars, but we'll give that one as 5 stars.
And the last one is Betamax Video Club at Betamax Pod. Absolute 5 stars. Amazing action sequences and genuine tension. One of the all-time greats. So, yeah, everyone's rated it pretty highly there.
Lots of love there.
I have to apologise sincerely to the memory of Jim Kelly. He absolutely was a martial artist, and I don't know why I said he wasn't. So,
I'm so glad you corrected that.
My serious apologies. I've been fed wrong information. I'm going back to the source to correct that. Don't worry. He was an amazing martial artist.
I was not the source of that information.
Right, yeah, cool. Thanks for throwing me under the bus, Gareth.
I do think he's one of the best Western martial artists on screen. I wish I'd seen more of him, like say in this film. I think O'Hara's quite good, but Jim Kelly was the best one that wasn't from the East. Sope and Gareth, can you tell people where to find your works, find you online, Instagram or?
Yeah, I'm only on Instagram. I went off Twitter a while back, so I'm only on Instagram, and it's G. Evans. and then work-wise, film-wise, the Raid films are out and around on Blu-ray, DVD, probably up on YouTube somewhere as well.
They're on Netflix at the moment.
They're on Netflix
both
too.
of them.
They are, right. There we go, yeah.
Yeah.
And Apostle, obviously, was through Netflix. God bless them for letting me make it. And then Gangs of London currently on Now TV and then also on Sky Atlantic.
And I am also only on Instagram. I came off Twitter last year, and that's at Sope Dirisu. Not really in Twitter at all. I think it's just mutual personal preference. And yeah, Gangs of London is on Sky Atlantic and Now TV. There's a Black Mirror episode that you can see me floating around in the back of on Netflix, and various different projects all over the shop.
I just want to point to that. I've discussed the end of that episode with many friends multiple times, and when I saw you in Gangs of London, I was like, "That's the guy from the end of Nosedive." I've interviewed Charlie Brooker on stage, and I was so excited for that season of Black Mirror, and I had my wife was away that weekend. I was like, right, I'm gonna power through all these episodes, and I loved it so much, but I just felt, when you just can't watch another episode because it's so dark and it's so twisted, and it was just Black Mirror just encapsulates this kind of feeling, which is kind of encapsulated now with COVID, but I just could not go and watch the second episode, and I think that was a perfect episode end to that nosedive, because it just kept on getting worse and worse and worse, and I just kept my heart was sinking, and there was that kind of release with yourself and Bryce Dallas Howard, which is just really captures the end, and I don't know, what was that like for you? How people talked about that ending to you?
I don't think anyone's actually discussed the ending with me, but I'm always surprised by how many people recognise me from it, because you're literally on screen for 40 seconds right at the end of the episode, But it is nice to know that it's left such a lasting impact on people.
No worries. Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining us. And please come again soon when Gangs of London 2, hopefully, comes back to our screens.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.
Enjoyed this episode of Flixwatcher podcast? Why not leave us a 5-star review on iTunes? You can also follow us at FlixWatcherPod on Twitter, and we're at FlixWatcher on Instagram. Thanks as always to the mighty people for their mighty tunes, and Ben from Rockwood Audio for his awesome editing skills. If you're looking to get your podcast edited as sweet as this, get in touch with Ben, and that's Rockwood, ROKK Wood Audio. Tell him Flixwatcher sent you.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.